Hello again people and welcome back to my Deltarune Chapter 2 analysis. As you could probably tell, these videos are not numbered, so they are meant to be appreciated as their own standalone videos, at least for now. While I would appreciate it if you would watch the first and second parts, you are by no means required to understand this video, so watch them at your leisure. In this installment, we will be discussing and analyzing the Cyber City, the midpoint of Chapter 2, and above all, we will discuss the day when Deltarune changed forever. Like before, I will front load the plot synopsis of this section and then move into the analysis portion. If you know the story already, and you probably do, skip to this timestamp. Last time we saw Chris, they were traveling with their two best friends. They arrived at a crossroads and Susie made the decision for them. Now Chris is all alone in the trash heap. Welcome to the Cyber City. An assortment of neon cat signs and flashing advertisements decorate the area. In the background, we see Susie and Rouse enter the city as well. It would appear they are exploring a separate part of the city, adding an extra layer of depth that the Card Kingdom never had. There appears to be a constant stream of car darkners traveling down the road. Where could they be going? Who knows? Traveling down a few rows, we spot Noelle, wandering just as aimlessly as Chris. When we finally catch up to her, she is naturally shocked. However, her shock is replaced with fear, as the Queen's call can be heard far away. Hilarity ensues as Noelle hides away from Queen in the dark alley, and Queen hides away from Berdly soon after. In another display of like-mindedness, both Queen and Berdly have formed an uneasy truce with Chris. Both are trying to find Noelle to complete their plan, and Noelle is having none of it. The both of them leave, and thankfully we have enough room for one more truce. That is, of course, if you choose that option. If you say no triple truces, Noelle will just assume you're joking and join your party anyway. It seems like Noelle can make decisions for Chris as well. The sound that plays when she joins the party is even the same that is played for Susie. Noelle has joined the party, and this changes everything, and we'll get to that, but first, exploration. You happen across a room with mice, which Noelle is particularly afraid of. She leaps backwards in fear, and the mice pass right by her. She refuses to continue until you remove the mice, so you do. This begins one of Noelle's many arcs for the chapter. A Vidro-Vidro-kun approaches and Noelle is caught off guard, as she supposedly has never been in a battle before. Thankfully, Vidro and Chris are more than willing to explain to her the battle system in totality. She likens the experience to Dragon Blazers, and she doesn't even realize how correct she is. The Cyber City is filled with many interesting darkners, but none more bland than the Addisons. These darkners are literal advertisements. They are made to make deals and sell things of various sizes and shapes. One of them assumes that Chris and Noelle are a couple, so they offer some couple shoes. Noelle immediately declines and explains that they are not a couple. Then she pauses. We see a text box appear in which the text is in parentheses. Her mouth is closed, so naturally we can assume this is Noelle's internal monologue. This aspect of the text boxes is 100% consistent, and it never deviates. So anyway, you have two options for your response. Affirming that Chris and Noelle are friends will warm her heart. The two Lightners have been separated in spirit for a long time. To know that Chris still sees her as a friend makes her genuinely happy. If you say you are something else, this will have a seemingly opposite effect. Noelle has no idea what Chris is referring to and just assumes that they are messing around. In an upper alleyway, you can see Rouse and Susie standing around and enjoying some sticks of cotton candy. Noelle looks over and sees Susie. No matter how much she wants to, she can't muster anything to say. She is also naturally taken aback by how Rouse looks. Unlike Susie, Noelle has a long history with Chris and their brother. Her confusion naturally supports the idea that the resemblance is uncanny. Later, we pass a giant poster for a Ferris wheel. Noelle is reminded of a memory of the past. Her and Chris would ride a Ferris wheel at the festival long ago. She wonders if Susie would ever ride a Ferris wheel with her, to which you can encourage, discourage, or say that Chris would ride with her instead. The last option gives more context on their past, as Noelle recounts a time that Chris shook the carriage while they were both inside. Unfortunately for Noelle, they stumbled across the Queen once again. After a close call from before, Noelle seeks to hide her face via a cardboard box. The robot face is inscribed onto the box to better sell the disguise, perfectly masking Noelle's visage. While this is happening, Chris is distracting Queen, who now has a chance to vent. Queen seems to be more vulnerable when Chris is around, as they offer little in terms of outside ideas. Chris has little to no voiced opinions on the matter, and this is an aspect of Chris that Queen is particularly drawn to. I wonder why. In her exposition, she explains that her intent is to make the world happy. No matter what, she will accomplish this goal because she knows what is best for the world. The label of villain is one that she will wear proudly, as she believes in her wafer of wafers that she is doing the right thing. Berdly appears once again, this time accompanied by a massive golden statue of Berdly proportions. The Queen misdirects him to move forwards while she retreats in the opposite direction, completely oblivious to Noelle standing right there. The Queen once again ignores Berdly, while allowing him to think she is on his side. Later, the two happen across a Darkner superhighway. Traveling down south all the way will lead you to this alley. Walking down this alley will... Oh my god, what is that? So anyway, after that's done, you can... Wait. What is that on the... Huh. Do you guys ever feel like you're forgetting something? Like, something super important? Whatever. If I can't remember, it's probably not that important. Mouse Room 2 is solved just as easy as the first, or so we think, as the force field does not go away. Noelle naturally investigates the mouse hole. By sending another wave of mice, we make Noelle leap once again, this time onto the button. Initially very upset, she quickly realizes that Chris was helping her solve the puzzle, so she stops. She had the ability to jump over the force field the whole time, she just didn't know it. Chris touches the cheese, and a mouse appears, much to Noelle's dismay. Afterwards, we have clearly learned our lesson, so we slowly maneuver the maze of cheese as to not, just kidding, cheese time! Finally, we arrive at annoying Mouse Room 3, which has a twist. Noelle walks a bit carelessly onto a platform, and the letter I appears on the screen. Before Noelle can sniff out the solution, the platform starts to quake, implying a sudden increase in gravity, followed by death. Chris must now orientate the blocks into the correct position, so that when the mouse are released, Noelle will jump to the next platform. Berdly stumbles along and realizes that Chris is trying to solve the puzzle, seemingly ignorant of Noelle, who is currently in danger. He starts speaking of her like she's a child who has no idea what she's doing. He obliviously explains how Noelle is love-struck, a powerless doe, proclaiming himself to be the only one who understands her. If Noelle were ever to fall, a group of mace can be seen catching her and placing her on the next platform. This puzzle doesn't require much input as it seems. Regardless, when the puzzle is complete, Berdly is livid. He doesn't believe Chris should get the credit for such work, and this anger causes him to not see Noelle still. After prolonged exposure to the mouse, Noelle admits that she isn't that afraid of them anymore. So, they move on. Berdly is unfortunately waiting just around the corner, and he is shocked to now find Chris and Noelle working together. As before, he has no idea what he's talking about, and assumes that Chris is forcing her to help them. He attacks, and can be dispatched in several ways. It seems that Berdly will continue to be a foil for at least a little while longer. After he is defeated, Chris and Noelle find themselves in another area that is heavily populated by cars. The Queen shows up once again looking for Noelle, but failing to see past her brilliant disguise. The Queen loads everyone into her illustrious chariot, and they are off. A quick snack break, along with some vehicular dark slaughter, brings the three to a massive pileup. Chris is given the task to clear it, so they are alone once again, but not for long. Off the beaten path, we move through this alleyway and find this guy. This is Spamton G. Spamton, a businessman who seems to have lost everything he once held dear, and he has done so while trying to attain the only thing he ever wanted. Freedom seems to be his goal, and he sees a potential partnership with Chris in his future. All he needs is that little soul of theirs. Spamton attacks, although his attack feels different from the other Darkners we have encountered so far. Throughout their fight, he asks Chris a series of questions, the last of which having only one correct answer. The deal is struck, but we won't see the ramifications for a while. Before we leave, we notice a torn poster on the wall. It's a poster of Queen selling her acid cleaner. Underneath is a poster of Spamton, and the implications of this are not yet fully clear. The Queen bids farewell to Chris and Noelle, still blinded by her own intent. Things are starting to wind down now as the danger has passed. Noelle has reached a sense of catharsis, ruminating over the past adventures she would share with Chris. She specifically mentions a time where they explored a forest away from the town. Their curiosity led them to a more feral part of their home. She explains how they never ended up finding anything, although I do have my doubts. As the two of you move through this area, you step on these letters, which spell out the word December, a seemingly random word given current context, and of course we'll get to that later. We finally arrive in this carnival area, games and prizes scattered throughout, yet it seems like no one is here to play. Susie and Rouse finally return to the party while in mid-conversation. Rouse is trying to tell Susie that the way she is doing something isn't the intended way, while Susie disagrees. The way they disagree more candidly now shows how far they've come in voicing their concerns to each other. Susie is elated to show Chris what Rouse has been teaching her. She sends a bolt of green energy directly at Chris, which heals them for 2 points of health. While they were alone, Susie has asked Rouse to teach her healing magic. It seems that Susie did want Rouse to teach her after all. They later discover that Noelle and Chris have been keeping each other company, and the four of them move on. The group continues up this long staircase to which they find a puzzle. Susie is annoyed over the seemingly large requirement to complete it, and Noelle sees this as an opportunity to impress Susie, so she offers to divide the work. Noelle will use a button to release a mouse, Susie and Rouse will use another button to pop the balloon, leaving Chris to catch all 20 mace in sequence. After the puzzle is complete, Susie gives Noelle a genuine compliment, a sensation that Noelle is not used to, being acknowledged for her intellect. The heart palpitations are real. And so the group happens across the Queen's mansion. And Noelle can't help but wonder why the hell they are even here in the first place. Before Rouse can explain, Queen appears once again ready to threaten Noelle. Noelle will join her now, or Berdly may just get a short bath in the acid lake. Noelle knows that a bath to a gamer is like garlic to a vampire, so she concedes. But before she can make it, Berdly steps out and asks what is going on. The Queen's gambit has failed, so now it's time for Plan C, and of course, C stands for cages. The Lightners are captured once again, but Rouse is left at the Queen's mercy, because she didn't make enough cages. The fate of our Lightners will have to wait for next time, as this is where we will end our story for now. Chapter 2 is mostly going to be about Noelle and her journey throughout. However, let's take a brief moment to talk about Susie and Rouse and how they've grown since the last time we saw them. In a sudden turn of events, a dark world seems to have opened in the library. As exciting as this new adventure is, the skeptic player would be interested in the how and the why. How was this dark world made while Noelle and Berdly were inside, and why was this dark world made in the library in the first place? To understand this is beyond the scope of the information we currently possess. The motives and desires of the knight are not concrete, as their identity is still a hot topic. We are, for the sake of this analysis, assuming it was the knight who specifically made the Chapter 2 fountain. The Queen says as such, although there is some wiggle room as the footage the Swatchlings are studying seems to conceal the actual appearance of the knight. The arrival of this dark world seems to have taken Susie by surprise, and yet Rousey shows up with a moderate amount of haste. He doesn't bother to ask how this dark world came into existence, even though you would assume it would be something he is interested in, considering this is his job. At the current moment, Rousey has been confirmed to know a few things that are not necessarily impossible to know on their own. The crux of people's suspicion surrounding the fluffy boy is all of the knowledge compiled together. He knows Susie and Chris's name before he meets them. He greets them as they walk into Castletown, almost as if he was expecting them to arrive at that very moment. He creates a bedroom for Chris that looks very similar to the Lightworld counterpart, and of course, who can forget the very suspicious line of Rousey wishing Chris good luck. If you believe these are all just random coincidences that could easily be explained, then yes, you are absolutely right. These are coincidences, in isolation. Rousey simply telling Chris good luck does not inherently mean he was fully aware of the dark world that was about to spring up out of the ground. Yet it was a figurative straw that broke the horse's back. Rousey being super turbo sus is old news. However, with current knowledge, he seems a bit more nefarious than he did before. And no, I have not flipped in favor of the Rousey is evil theory. That is even older news that even the most diehard of theorists have dropped since then. What I'm really trying to highlight is his ability to lie. Technically, this is a clarification to one of my previous theories. There is a small line between Susie and Rousey which details how she taught him the concept of sarcasm during their alone time. Sarcasm is the use of inflection to convey the opposite message compared to the words you are speaking. The understanding of sarcasm goes hand in hand with deception, because to understand sarcasm, you understand that a person may say something that they do not really mean. In the past, I linked Rousey's ignorance to the idea of sarcasm as evidence that he is incapable of deception, which I was wrong. Rousey is clearly capable of deception, as in Chapter 4 he is almost desperately trying to hide the prophecy from Susie. Now there is the argument to be made that he only recently became capable of this as per Susie's teachings, yet that doesn't explain why the birdcage is missing in Chris's room. Just a quick little refresher, the birdcage is where Chris keeps the soul when not in use. Because of this, seemingly, Rousey did not include the birdcage despite including almost everything else. This simple detail is weighted with a whole lot of subtext, as the only reason Rousey would leave it out is because he knows he is supposed to. He made these rooms with dedication. He wouldn't just leave it out because he's lazy. So this, admittedly, tiny addendum to Chris's room could be seen as a sign of deception, a literal example of lying by omission. Unfortunately, this is as far as the analysis can go without dipping into theory crafting, and that's not really what this series is for. So for now, let the record show there is a good bit of evidence to support the idea that Rousey is capable of deception even as far back as Chapter 2. Now let's talk about Susie. She has really stepped up her game in the new chapters. Now that she feels comfortable around her new party members, she feels more open to the idea of being a hero. However, I don't necessarily think she acts the way she does based on her status. Susie has her own personal reasons for stepping in and coming to Noelle's aid, but her heroic behavior should be treated as such. Susie is first to step up against the Queen. This is beneficial for the story's narrative as well as her progression. Chris, our silent protagonist, doesn't speak very much. I know that they speak, we just can't hear them. Susie is there to ask all the questions the audience would want answers to. And may I just say, it is a good thing she's there to do so. The behavior which Susie exhibits clearly portrays her as a more virtuous person as well as someone who cares deeply for Noelle. Chapter 2 marks a setup for Susie. That, of course, being how she seeks out the help of Rouse to teach her how to heal. Obvious subtext out of the way first, she pretended like she didn't want him to teach her, which could have been for a multitude of reasons. Perhaps she felt Chris wouldn't think this was cool. Maybe she was embarrassed because she was trying something new. Or maybe there were still some assumptions regarding how Chris saw her. Whatever the reason, this is a meaningful step in Susie's progression. The first step involved her beginning to trust people rather than just punching all of her problems away, and now, with a solid base, she seeks to remove the pain from other people's lives. Some people have speculated that she wants to heal Rudy, others think she wants to have this in her pocket to further safeguard her friends. For a long time, Susie has been defined by her capacity to hurt people. However, I think this setup is leaning towards how she will prove that her capacity to heal is far greater. Susie has been wounded by this world, a wound of neglect pulsating from her person, which has since begun to heal. This care has been given to her, and Susie has started to heal herself. As a result, she wants to pass on this kindness to other people. It takes courage to heal, both yourself and those around you. Noelle has joined our party, and with this, we have access to all of her abilities. Noelle is actually very overpowered when you think about all the things she can do. She has an AoE sleep spell, a damaging spell that can freeze opponents, and she can heal. Seems like a pretty stacked toolkit if you ask me. Which is a little strange, considering she is completely new to the idea of battling. Chris and this Vera have to walk her through the basics of battle, so you would think she doesn't have any abilities, or at least a few abilities. Then again, Susie had some abilities from the start, so for now, we'll just chalk this up to video game logic. This scene in particular is intriguing, given the narrative which Deltarune has sought to tell. So far, Noelle is the only one who has questioned the battle system as a fundamental part of the world, from a newcomer's perspective. Now, there is always the chance that the Queen took Berdly aside and explained the system to him, which would explain why he never questions it. This, however, doesn't really account for Susie, who is visibly confused over the fact that she now has an axe. The only reason she accepts it is because she just decides to go along with everything. Noelle likens the overall battle system to Dragon Blazers, and dang it, that was most certainly foreshadowing that I was too dumb to see. Noelle's journey through Chapter 2 is one of overcoming fear. Every single time a mouse gets close to Noelle, she jumps high into the air. This genuinely fearful interaction is turned into a literal gameplay mechanic, or rather, a character's actions which take place as a result of something else are normal reactions and just appear to be mechanical from our point of view. Noelle jumping back is used to solve Mouse Puzzle 2, yet there are meaningful psychological reasons for why she would do this. She's afraid of the mice jumping out at her, so she jumps. And with this, it does make you wonder, doesn't it? Is a character taking an action in battle just something they do, while on our end, it appears to be a video game mechanic? I think so, but also I think it goes a little further than that because, as we can see, the world changes in a fundamental way. The purple wireframe looking background is most likely something the characters can see. Noelle looks around and is shocked by the sudden change in scenery, as she is unaware of the battle system. Just for the record, I am calling it a system, even though that might not be the proper classification for it, for the sake of your clarity. Just roll with me for a bit. So, Deltarune has already been established as a narrative with diegetic aspects, and Noelle's confusion in her introduction confirms that these elements are not always something that the world's inhabitants know instinctively. It's similar to discovering infrared light via an infrared camera. That infrared light was always there and was a fundamental aspect of the world you inhabited. You just didn't see it and therefore did not know it existed. The jury is still out on whether this is an aspect of the Dark World specifically. Until we see a battle in the Light World, we can't say for sure. Really, what I'm trying to get across is that, at least seemingly, there is no battle system, but there also is one at the same time. For the characters who exist in this world, Chris, Susie, etc., the system doesn't exist, and therefore is just a normal facet of the world they inhabit. Similar to, say, how the wind blows, or maybe even how water refracts light. For us, the player in this circumstance, we see the aspects of the world as a battle system because to us, Deltarune is a video game. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that all of the UI elements are invisible to the characters because they aren't. In Chapter 1, when giving the tutorial, Rouse specifically references the TP gauge and he accidentally explains it to be on the left rather than being behind them. He explains it for the sake of our perspective because he is aware of our presence, but we're not going to talk about that today. What we would refer to as a battle system is just something that happens in the Deltarune world, and this is supported by the fact that she compares this to an in-universe video game that she plays. She ends up taking this pretty well, and that's probably because she hasn't put the pieces together that her life is a video game. But we'll have time to dissect that in Chapter 3. Really, Noelle seems a lot more flustered by the mouse, if anything. It would be interesting to analyze why she is afraid of the mouse specifically, but I think we should just skip ahead to the part where she realizes that her fears are an inhibitor, which detracts from her overall potential. Much like Susie, Noelle's fear is a large hindrance on her life. Noelle is being exposed to the mouse, and she has the same reaction every single time. Exposure is a viable means to desensitize. As you probably guessed, desensitize literally means to make less sensitive to. So the understanding is that with every event with the mouse, Noelle becomes less sensitive and her response is reduced until non-existent. This is what is happening throughout the story clear as day, although I find it more interesting to talk about how these puzzles were never going to stop Noelle had she not been afraid of the mouse. Mouse Room 1. She could have just walked through the room and ignored them after she stepped on the button. Mouse Room 2. Noelle always had the ability to just jump over the force field. She just didn't think she could. Same with the annoying Mouse Room 3. Obviously, the only difference being that there was a chance of her missing the jump and falling, but as we saw, the mouse would have been there to catch her. These rooms are not only showing Noelle that she doesn't have to be afraid of Mace, but it also represents how her fears are standing in the way of her full potential. The majority of this chapter, Noelle spends her time hiding herself or following someone else when she shouldn't have to. Not that she doesn't have a good reason, mind you, the Queen is not someone you should take lightly. The Queen's plan is to use Noelle as her tool for world domination. Her overall plan is to have Noelle make a new dark fountain that is stronger than the first. Her understanding is that this will cause more darkness to leak into the light world, and once the world is covered in darkness, she can make the world better in her eyes. Or rather, no eyes. At her core, the Queen wants to solve the world's problems, starting with Noelle's. Part of the Queen's plan potentially involves her changing Noelle's face, making it into a robot one. The wording is for comedic effect, but the deeper implications tell that the Queen is looking for subservience, which she will receive from a roboticized version of Noelle. Queen is a computer herself, so naturally she would be biased in the conversation of flesh versus metal. A robot version of Noelle would be more like Queen, thus being easier to control. This is one of many reasons the Queen is cited by many as a potential stand-in for the mother of the main cast. Noelle, I would say, fits this description the most. However, the more I think about this, it could simply be that she possesses maternal qualities, and this idea of a motherly figure has bled into all of Toei's writing. One of the biggest inspirations for this game was a little RPG titled Mother, so you know the role of such will have a big part to play within the narrative. Queen is very overbearing, acting as a forceful hand to make Noelle do things under the assumption that she knows what's best for her. Any reasonably emotionally intelligent player could see that Noelle doesn't want anything to do with the Queen or her plan. so it makes total sense that Noelle would hide her identity. The cardboard box with the robot face not only highlights how oblivious the queen is, but also is a physical representation of masking. Masking, in terms of psychology, is the act of repressing or concealing certain aspects of your personality or behavior to appear more neurotypical. It's a type of defense mechanism, not necessarily something tied to a specific mental affliction. A blanket term used to describe the age-old struggle to fit in. The process of masking can be influenced by several factors. Your environment is the most notable, considering that this describes your attempt to coexist with said environment. Make no mistake, we see evidence of Noelle masking her behavior as far back as Chapter 1, long before she ever donned her Roblox. Out of all the psychological concepts I have talked about on this channel, I try to make it clear when I am only vaguely familiar with the concept. This usually comes in the form of a disclaimer. That is, of course, until instances like this come along when I have an intimate understanding based on past experience. Nothing has changed drastically. I am not claiming to be an expert, although I do have experience with masking. In casual conversations, people are typically expected to follow unspoken rules. Figuring out these rules for the first part of my life was a bit of a learning curve. Have good eye contact, but don't have too much eye contact. Smile when you speak, even though you're not happy, just so the person you're talking to feels better. Maybe I simply had a harder time with this because I worked in the service industry for so long, but this is something that I, at least think, have become really good at. I call it my customer service voice. Let me see if I can replicate this for you. Hi, how's it going? You guys doing okay? You got everything you need? Huh? You need some more water? Okay, sure, let me get that for you. Keeping up this cadence is a constant effort on my part. And this example is one of many. It's different for everyone. For Noelle, she masks herself in such that she is agreeable in situations despite how unfavorable they are for her. Berdly takes advantage of this due to his own misunderstanding of people's emotions. A person who can rarely see when their actions undermine someone, and someone else who rarely speaks out when they are being undermined. Truly a match made in hell. I think I said this already, but this is very important to highlight. Masking is not tied to any specific mental condition. People often associate masking with people who are on the autism spectrum, but this is not a requirement. We see what I believe is a prime example of Noelle's personality in the way she acts on her blog. Noelle's blog posts are insanely invaluable for us as we see instances of her interacting with people without the constant fear of societal expectations. This was actually a recent topic of conversation in a Gartic phone session that I shared with some members on my Discord. Talking to people can require a certain level of effort that isn't as nearly prevalent in an online setting. The face, the tone of voice, and the appearance are all forgone, making the experience easy for someone who may be neuroatypical. We see in casual online conversations that Noelle is much more open, excited, eager to talk about things that she's interested in. This unfortunately doesn't work because Jockington seems to only care about sports, but the example still stands. Noelle seems to be much more comfortable when she doesn't have to talk to people directly. If this wasn't enough evidence, Noelle says as such when in the Ferris wheel with Susie. She confides in Susie, talking about how most days it's the people around her that are scary. This would be where the box comes in. The box is literally masking her face, although the act of going along with Queen's plan is in of itself a way of masking Noelle's personality. Noelle's evolution is initiated by the introduction of Susie and the reintroduction of Chris. Now would be a good time to discuss the attraction to Susie which Noelle possesses. Susie is one of, and arguably the greatest reason why Noelle finally stands up for herself towards the chapter's conclusion. Considering how these two characters are polar opposites, you may be confused as to why they would even be attracted to each other. But as I mentioned earlier, they both have a set of inhibitions as well as a crippling sensation of fear that would stop them from achieving their full potential. Susie's fear stops her from interacting with people, and Noelle's fear prevents her from interacting in a way that is authentic to her. They are almost like two sides of the same coin. Very similar, despite how different they appear. Noelle starts off by admiring Susie from a distance. Only after the pep talk from Rudy in Chapter 1 does she make her move. Thankfully, her time with Susie in the Dark World gives her so much more room for bonding time than a typical study session would have. Exposure to the mice allowed for Noelle to overcome her fear of them, which in turn led to her being able to think more calmly than she previously would have. During the mouse bucket puzzle, Noelle properly has a chance to show off how smart she is. She wants to impress Susie. Unbeknownst to her, this isn't too difficult. But the motivation is still there. After her plan works, Susie gives Noelle a genuine compliment that Noelle appreciates about as much as you would expect. This, compiled with the acknowledgement of her true self, is more than enough for Noelle's feelings to be completely affirmed. Before Chapter 2, you could easily see Noelle's infatuation as purely visual. However, this is the first of many scenes in which they share some really good chemistry. This acceptance that Susie has for Noelle made her feel seen, and as a result she is more than willing to stand up for her, just as Susie will do later on. We'll get to that in good time. However, I think the greatest of payoffs lies in this one moment right before you meet up with Susie and Rouse. This would be an extra detail for those who decide to play the game again, and it is really worth complimenting Toby for his storytelling abilities. When you're walking through this area, we get Noelle ruminating about a time forgotten. She explains how there was once a time when they would all explore the forest together outside of hometown. While Noelle claims that they never found anything, she can't help but feel nostalgic, and it seems like the Dark Worlds themselves have brought about this feeling of nostalgia. As you move through this area, you walk on these speak and spell buttons, which eventually spell out the name December, the same name as Noelle's late sister, and the very word which made Noelle collapse at the spelling bee so many years ago. This name doesn't mean anything to us as of right now, but it actually marks a point of progression for Noelle. Before, when Noelle tried to spell out the word December, she became stunned and could not continue. This naturally happened a long time ago in chronological order, but as we can see, Noelle has changed since then. She has become more comfortable talking about her past. The memories of the past aren't crippling for her, and that is thanks to this Dark World. In fact, a lot of this Dark World seems to be catered to Noelle, almost as if this world was made for her. But we'll get to that later. The annoying dog is a facet of Deltarune's narrative that people rarely discuss. The community universally knows this as a Toby Fox stand-in. He uses this image to speak at public events.
I'm Toby Fox, creator of Undertale!
He uses this image as an avatar on social media. And the annoying dog is a recurring character from Undertale, his previous work. This is typically where the conversation ends, and that's fine. However, I wanted to take the time to talk about how Toby uses the annoying dog in Chapter 2 to essentially cheat the narrative a little bit. Let me explain. Toby Fox is a writer, a damn good one. As a writer, it's his responsibility to get his main characters from A to B. The way he does this makes all the difference, and the annoying dog has been used as a narrative tool to ensure a specific series of events unfold. People may not recognize or remember this, but the reason why the story of Chapter 2 happens exactly the way it does is because of the annoying dog. Sure, Susie and Chris were absolutely on their way to the library anyway, but because of this traffic jam, no one but our Lightners made it to the Dark World. The reason why I use the word cheat is because of the overall goal of the writer. Writing is a craft, it has standards and scales just like anything else. Instead of a prefaced reason for the traffic jam, the annoying dog decides to find a tiny car and just makes the traffic jam happen. It feels random and unprompted. When the writer is getting the cast from A to B, it usually is in their best interest to make the process seamless rather than just making the story happen. The annoying dog has interfered with the story of Toby's games in the past, but never necessarily to this degree. If the dog wasn't there, then the cyber world would probably have been discovered by at least a handful of people going in and out of the library. A dark world being opened up in the middle of town creates a narrative conundrum that Toby has decided to use his writer's stand-in to fix. This is the main issue, by the way. Chris and Susie were on their way to the library regardless of the traffic jam. The dog, however, is responsible for the Dark World not being discovered by anyone else. The fact that the annoying dog is a stand-in for the creator is even more detrimental, because this series of events could literally be seen as the writer reaching their hand into the story and making things happen the exact way they want it without having to worry about coherence. Now, this is not a common occurrence, thankfully. We see the reason why the Dark World isn't discovered is better in the other chapters. In Chapter 3, we can see that Undyne was most likely deterred by the fog which appeared around the Dark World's edge. In Chapter 4, the rain stops anyone from walking into the church. This reason is obviously better considering weather is universally known to be something the main characters cannot control. It's a reasonable excuse to explain why someone might not enter a room. That, and of course, church service had recently happened. So, ignoring the funny idea that the annoying dog is just a force of nature, I wanted to talk about using this as a writing strategy in general. This isn't really a criticism, but rather an opening of dialogue. Is this a reasonable thing to do as a writer of a story? The skill of a writer comes from its process. If the characters just jumped on a boat and sailed away to their destination with no interesting roadblocks, the progression makes sense but would make for a pretty boring story. Alternatively, if the writer just gives our protagonists a magical place teleporter thingy so they get to their destination instantaneously, that is not much better. With any writing decision, we have pros and cons. This decision in particular is efficient. First of all, the writer doesn't have to worry about a random NPC sneaking into the library, something that could very well happen. Also, all the main characters that you plan on developing further get to go to the same place without exploring the town first. As for the negatives, well, it's like I said, it's sort of like cheating a bit. The annoying dog has only ever been referenced to be inside the computer lab working on a game. There is narrative setup for the dog, but no setup for the dog driving a car through traffic to cause this very specific traffic jam. I would absolutely regard this as a plot convenience. Okay, let's get into some potential arguments. The annoying dog has had a presence in Toby Fox's games in the past. Notable examples from Undertale include grabbing Toriel's phone, grabbing Papyrus's attack in his fight, and grabbing the legendary artifact in Waterfall. These are all instances where the dog has jumped in to mess with us, but the distinction is clear. These are either gags or subversions that have no long-term effect on the narrative at large. The role of the annoying dog has been increased tremendously in this moment. What really doesn't help is Toby's reluctance to clarify who/what the annoying dog is in universe. We know the dog as a stand-in for him, but what is the unseasoned player supposed to make of this? I find it hard to take a stance on which side of the argument I would support because there are reasonable explanations for both sides. On one hand, this dog being inserted into the story to make things happen a specific way could be seen as lazy writing. On the other hand, if this dog is to represent the hand of the author, then this character would literally act as a god and be obliged to do whatever they please. It's Toby's story, and he has decided to insert a stand-in of himself within, so this is what he has decided to use his stand-in for in this particular instance. I guess it really all comes down to whether you are against or in favor of the author's self-insert having an effect on the story in a meaningful way. If I had to decide on a side, I would probably be against the dog being used to make the plot more convenient. Thankfully, it seems that Toby is at the very least against overusing this strategy, as the future reasons why the Dark World isn't discovered are far stronger, and the annoying dog returns to the form of a mild inconvenience for the sake of comic relief. Now let's talk about the overall design of the Cyber City. If you did decide to watch part 1, then you would know that I spoke with nothing but praise of the Cyber Field. The Cyber City has dropped from the high of Cyber Field, and even though I'm saying this, it's really not that bad. I would regard the progression through Cyber City as average. Still a step down from Field, but not by much. There are these roads which have cars that if they hit you, reset your progress. You have to signal to cross, which will either make the cars stop entirely or make them move much slower. These areas are perfectly fine, and really they are similar to the areas in Cyber Field, but they are devoid of music or the rhythmic timing of Cyber Field, which greatly reduce the fun value. This may be intentional, but we'll get to that in a second. Most of these sections only stand to impede your progress by a few seconds. The annoying mouse puzzles are more vital for the sake of Noelle's character arc, helping her overcome her fears. They act as roadblocks as well, but I find them more tolerable personally because of the aforementioned character progression. Probably the most enjoyable sequence would be the team puzzle, and really the biggest reason for this is that it also shows off Noelle being more open and sharing her intellect. I find a more interesting conversation in the potential environmental narrative found in Cyber City. When the fun gang is traversing the upper area, the fun value is at an all-time high. They're riding around in teacups, the music is booming, they crash into Berdly with roller coasters, they're in danger, but, they're having a good time. When they fall, I find the subtle tone shift upon entering the trash area very interesting. Eventually, we do get back to more fun areas with the flashing lights and carnival games, but before that, we see these dark alleyways, minor glitches in the environment, and of course, all of this trash. This beautiful world which the Queen rules over is built upon a shaky foundation. The history of the lower sections have a story, and it's not concerned with us knowing what that story is. I feel as if this area holds the key to a dark world long forgotten. We have already seen instances of old Darkners being thrown away. The Darkners are objects that are given memories thanks to the worlds they inhabit. The king was bitter, never to forgive the Lightners which abandoned him, and it seems like this will be a common trend. Spamton was not always the sleazy businessman living in a dumpster. In fact, at one point, it looks like he was happy, and potentially held to a regard equal to that of the Queen. I feel as if this is a specific narrative beat that has yet to be explained, but if you would allow me to get philosophical for a moment, I could see this as a deconstruction of the concept of the city. A city is a congregation of several people and entities, places that supply a higher level of goods and services compared to, say, a small town. This deconstruction stems from the trope of moving to the big city. A small town resident moves away for whatever reason and they start a new life in the big city, which is, at the time, implied to be better. We see the beginnings of this in Chapter 1 when you talk to Mr. Caddington. He talks about how Azrael has moved to the big city to become a big shot. The trope typically progresses into the small town resident moving to the city and realizing that it's not what they were expecting. A city typically has a higher quality of living, or at least has the ability to be. It depends on wealth, obviously, but the reality is that a city is only able to provide such things for its residents because it has the ability to import them. Food, medicine, literature, you name it. Yet the logistics of a city often shadow the general public's ability to see just how much effort the good or service took to produce. Fresh produce and meat are notable examples. If you live in a small town, a farm town perhaps, then you would most likely work around animals and see the effort required. However, in the city, you go to a supermarket and you get some eggs. This is what I get when I see this disheveled, unkept underbelly of Cyber City. Obviously, this dark world recreation doesn't work the same, so the process is different, but the lesson is still there. To create all of this fun and flair above, there will always be a part of the city that is not so fun. Where they dump their garbage, the place where Darkners like Spamton live when they lose everything. It seems that for every place there is prosperity, another place is suffering just out of view. Out of sight does not mean it should be out of mind, and I think many can benefit from this lesson. While the Queen was not directly responsible for the suffering of Spamton, there was a level of suffering that the Queen was indifferent to while ruling from her blazing throne. We are back at it again for another round of good intentions, a recurring theme found within the narrative structure of Deltarune Chapter 2. Characters who seek to do good for the world or for the sake of others end up doing the exact opposite. First, we spoke of the Music Boys, so now let's talk about the Chicken Nugget Boy. Fresh off the heels of his character analysis, I would say that Berdly is understandable, even though he's not completely excusable. Berdly's outer shell can easily be seen as inflammatory or downright irritating. Yet at his core, he intends to make sure the world is better for his best friend. The center point of Berdly's behavior comes from his internalized expectation to perform. These expectations are what is driving him to, at the very least, appear smart. A notable example of this is where he demands credit for solving Mouse Room 3. It's not necessarily about being smart as much as it is to be perceived as smart. Berdly has come to understand that this is what is required to receive affection, and I believe this is why he works so hard to change the world. Berdly seeks to create a Smartopia, a new type of society that stems from the Dark World's ability to turn fiction into reality. This is probably one of the reasons why he takes to the Dark World so well. It's a world that speaks in fiction. As someone who lives in a lie, he would easily be drawn to the Dark World's ability to reinforce that lie. Those who seek to create a utopic society often perceive the original as unpleasant. In Berdly's ideal world, he would be smart, as Noelle would always be at his side. As a little bluebird who has trouble understanding the emotions and wishes of other people, he was woefully mistaken for thinking Noelle would approve of this, yet this is what he believed regardless. He unironically believed that Noelle would appreciate this new world when we all know that would have sucked. Especially when you take into account how ignorant the Queen was regarding the roaring. In the case of Berdly, we find a visionary trying to change the world into his ideal version. Everyone has their ideal world that would be perfect for them, and as you probably guessed, not everyone shares in this sentiment. The key here is understanding his intentions and where he went wrong. Attempting to change the world and make it better are not nefarious goals from the surface, unless you are changing the world around yourself. The sentiment becomes incredibly self-serving in this context. Forget the limited information, this would be blatant ignorance of information. This also forgoes any semblance of introspection and self-growth. It would make you stagnant. No new ideas means no growth, no change, no learning from your mistakes. What was that saying again? The road to hell is paved with good intentions. Hell, in most representations, is personalized, and I can imagine a stagnant world with Berdly as its ruler would seem like a hell for Noelle. And as I write this, I wonder if this is what the tale of hell is meant to represent. It's a tale that is followed into hell, which could be perceived as the end result of the Dark Worlds gone unchecked. A fictional reality that serves a singular creator and no one else. I have already speculated on how the Dark Worlds could be perceived as an alluring temptation which plays into your own insecurities, so I wonder how much of this will ring true for Deltarune's overall narrative. Thankfully, Berdly did not stagnate, learning his lesson. Before Rousey stops him, he was about to make a neo-Dark World for the sake of everyone rather than just himself. A meaningful step in the right direction, although one that was also misguided. This was obviously because he lacked the critical information, and as you probably already noticed, this will be a common factor in the theme of good intentions. It will continue further when we get to the Queen, a character equally oblivious to Noelle's wishes. Yet that is something we'll get to later. Now let's get into the enemies of Cyber City. 4 new Darkners include Pop-Up, a literal pop-up ad, the Ambulance, which is an antivirus software, and of course you have the Mouse, which is a computer mouse, and finally Mouse Wheel, which is an interesting case. The pop-up is very similar to Spamton, being made of an abstract digital concept rather than a physical object. Technically, you could say that the data which forms the image/URL of the pop-up window is what the Darkner is made of. I relate this Darkner to Spamton not just because you see them after departing the trash area, but also because they embody similar sentiments. Spamton is a spam email, a piece of data designed to entice a person to click on a link or buy something. An alluring graphic that was hastily made and forgotten soon after. If you click on a pop-up, another will appear, and now you have to fight it along with the others. During the development of Deltarune Chapter 2, one of the developers mentioned a bug in an interview where he was able to duplicate the pop-ups infinitely, which ended up crashing the game. Pop-up along with Ambulance were also designed by a guest artist, Splendid Land, another indie dev. They were also responsible for making a game called Formless Star, an interesting little game where you collect different animals on a planet that changes form every so often. Link for that game will be down below. The appearance of Pop-Up is very similar to Finfin, a dolphin mascot from a digital pet raising game called Finfin on Tio the Magic Planet. This wasn't the artist's intention, as they just imagined a dolphin fitting the Pop-Up vibe in general. Pop-Up's other act is to block, which requires you to mash a button, and once you block 10 pop-ups, you can then spare it. The windows that pop up in the fight are marginally interesting until you get to this one. This one features Everyman. This is absolutely a section of Deltarune theory crafting that I have never touched since its release. Everyman is this recurring thing that keeps popping up in Deltarune, so I guess it's only fitting we see him here too. The appearance of this entity is so enigmatic considering that the first time we see him is in the True Lab of Undertale. He just randomly appears and proceeds to get eaten by butterflies. In Deltarune, he is seen spray painted on a wall, he can appear in Jewel's fight, and now he's here. He's never addressed in-game, even though equally strange characters like Ice-E are, and his presence implies that he's a Darkner even though people have seen him in the Light World. Really, this could just be a running gag, although it's pretty strange that we've seen this dude in almost every chapter. The Ambulance is an antivirus software also designed by Splendid Land. It takes on the form of a giant bipedal ambulance with a syringe for a head. The Dark World makes up a coherent system, even if that system isn't fully obvious at first. The Viraviro-kun is made to be a computer virus, and the Ambulance, the antivirus that fixes it. They both exist in this Dark World as equals, despite the fact that one takes on a more disruptive role. The dichotomy of these Darkners could be one of many examples of Taoism, referenced in the many themes of this game. Two forces which appear to be contradictory turned out to be intertwined. The Ambulance is nothing without Viro, and vice versa. This is one of many dualities that encompass Deltarune. The mouse has interesting narrative weight, which is also represented in gameplay. Noelle is initially afraid of mice. In the act menu, she will explain why they look so scary. They're small and they move around super fast. The mouse are particularly unique, as they are one of the only physical Darkners of this chapter. They are most likely inspired by the fact that in computer labs, you always seem to have a bunch of mice lying around that either don't work or just work a little bit. But their battle minigame is actually a reference to Mousetrap, a board game that released in the 1960s. The red cage is meant to come down and trap them. The mouse Darkner has a unique interaction that always gets a laugh out of me. If you're fighting them with Rouse and Susie in your party, Rouse can set a trap and then Susie springs the trap. I always love this moment because it's one of the rare occasions where Rouse is visibly annoyed by Susie's shenanigans. Also, when you use the upgrade act, the mouse will be chased away by a task, which you now have to fight instead. In a way, the relationship between the mouse and the task is just another example of opposing forces. The mouse is also a particularly interesting Darkner, as it is one of the only ones that can undergo some kind of evolution. The mouse wheel is technically a separate Darkner altogether, but we can clearly tell that they are three mouse combined together. They don't even have the decency to wear a trench coat. The mouse wheel is a reference to the admittedly disturbing real-world phenomena of the Rat King. Not going to show this on screen because it can get pretty gnarly, but in some circumstances, rats are born and they stay too close together for too long, so their tails get tied together and then they're just stuck like that. As you could imagine, this is rare, but I think the mouse wheel is almost certainly a direct reference to this. We have already spoken of the great surprise which was the Undertale 6th anniversary stream, but people underestimate just how impactful Chapter 2 was. This was the day that Deltarune changed forever, and no, that is not an exaggeration. With Chapter 2, we saw several quality of life improvements. The Mercy Gauge has been introduced, so now we can get a better feel for how much acting we have to do before the enemy can be spared. Really, this was only useful during boss fights, but it's still a good addition. Noelle has now entered the game in full force, and with her at our side, we get further context of the past, and potentially the future. Through her, we now have new pathways and opportunities to challenge fate. The weird route will be discussed in full, but that entire sequence will warrant its own video. As you see, we're not quite done with Side A yet. So far, Noelle has overcome her fear of mice, and with some newfound courage that Susie has graciously given her, she has become more trusting of her own voice. Her story for this chapter has not yet been completed, but this is hardly the only interesting plot point going on. Susie has begun her journey of learning healing magic. She wants to better the world around her, starting with the limiting of harm that comes to her and her allies. With current day information, we know this first step pays off, and I predict it will continue to do so. Rouse has solidified himself as someone who knows more than he lets on, and while this will not be addressed for another chapter or two, this would certainly alter the player's perception of Rouse going forward. While Chris was alone, they had a run-in with this shady businessman. He gave us little choice to accept his deal, although it is in our hands whether or not we will cooperate. You probably noticed that I have barely spoken of Spamton throughout this video, and I especially haven't talked about his deal with Chris. And of course, that was intentional. For now, I think that Spamton more than anyone represents how the world of Deltarune is rapidly changing. Technically, you can get a Shadow Crystal from Jevil, but many people forget that Jevil didn't initially do that. Spamton was, and Chapter 2 in general, was the first to introduce the idea of the Shadow Crystals. And with this, a new mystery. New characters who can and will have a profound effect on the narrative, and of course, our party members back showing new sides to themselves that we have never seen before. This was the day that Deltarune changed forever, and we are never going back. Thank you all so much for watching. Goodbye. To be continued in Part 4. Yes, I know I forgot to call this Part 3, just roll with it. Spamton G. Spamton, the most tragic character in all of Deltarune. I would like to thank all of the Nighthawk channel members. Thank you Lilico, thank you Bleed4MBG, thank you Vantum, thank you Kiriyami, thank you Avast Antivirus, thank you Savvy Sillybug, thank you Gaston Zumbo, thank you LJ Afton, thank you Fluby, thank you Heboi, thank you Mine, thank you Iceburger, thank you J-Dog the Jester, thank you Lucas, thank you Lumen Scented, thank you The True Duality, thank you Cappy Cappy, thank you Gussie Awesome, thank you Sazaimon, thank you Calypso Love, thank you Braheim, thank you Pagochi, thank you Death the Kid, thank you Angry Freddy, thank you Abthormal, thank you Jeddirk, thank you James Bryan, thank you Timac, thank you D Money, thank you Ada's Outside, thank you Iru Pop, thank you Norkbork, thank you Unfolding Space, thank you Duck, thank you Luna Asashiho, thank you Chaos Frist, thank you Just Neon, thank you MF Puma. Thank you all so much.